In this interview, Julie Hanna talks about innovation and entrepreneurship. Hanna is a tech pioneer who has served as a founding executive of several Silicon Valley tech companies. In 2015, President Barack Obama asked Hanna to serve as a presidential ambassador for global entrepreneurship.
Julie will use her expertise leading Kiva to increase access to capital.
Today, she serves as the executive chair of the board at Kiva, the micro-lending platform that revolutionized crowdfunding when it was launched in 2005, and whose mission it is to connect people through lending to alleviate poverty. Julie Hanna speaks about her signature initiative called Global Capital Access and what we can learn from Silicon Valley.
Well, I mean, we get a lot of things right and we get a lot of things wrong. So, in short, do the things we do right and ignore the things we do wrong. And what I mean by that is that, there is a high side and a low side to everything. So for example, we've had these principles of sort of move fast, break things, which is sort of Mark Zuckerberg's kind of mantra to the Facebook culture. And, the high side of that is that you run rapid experiments and you are very innovative. The low side of that is that there's less thought about consequence. Now, one of the things that I think is really unique to Norway is there's a very deep, and maybe more than any culture in the world, at least that I've been exposed to, is a very deep understanding and thought about choice, consequence, unintended consequences. And I think we live in a world that really sort of needs that example. If you overthink choice, consequence, and unintended consequences, you do nothing. So the balance between those two is something I think, sort of drawing on the high side of what we do in the Valley around running rapid, limited experiments to move forward. Another is, I would say that one of the things that we uniquely do is we think about distribution from the get-go. So we think about global distribution, and we'll even constrain our products. We'll design our products to enable and advantage global distribution. And so one of the things is that think global, act hyper local.
If I turn this question around, what could others possibly learn from Norway and Norway's expertise? What would you think were our competitive advantages? And maybe seen from the energy industry and from the renewable energy industry's point of view?
Well, again, it's this idea of harmonizing stewardship and profit, purpose-driven profit. I think that in most parts of the world, we've created a false choice between the two. And so we are really in need of examples of where that is working and succeeding. Also, if you look at the States, we've sort of taken this kind of anti-government approach. We're kind of Darwinian about the way we do things. We don't think we need safety nets. We don't think we need guardrails. And you can see sort of the challenges that we have as a result of that. And so I think, again, Norway is an excellent example of how, when you have the partnership between government and the private sector and striking that balance very well.
But you also claim that companies are often very short-term oriented, very financial, quarterly reporting oriented. So how do we work on that?
Part of, I think, the reason that Norway thinks so responsibly around choice and consequence is you take the long view. And when you take the long view, purpose and profit align very nicely. So I think, again, Norway is at the forefront of really being living example of that.
We have to move to the US for a bit. We are not going to talk about the guy that Michelle Obama used to call only the candidate. We are actually going back to talk about Barack Obama, because he's the guy that you work with and with entrepreneurship. Now tell us about it, Obama's vision, and how did that inspire you? What was this about?
So he created a role called the Presidential Ambassador for Global Entrepreneurship, which was really born out of his insight that entrepreneurship, the model of entrepreneurship that the US practices, is really the bedrock of our economy. The way that we support it, are inspired by it, enable it, and that it may be the one thing that the US is most universally admired for around the world, and that if we can begin exporting that flavor of entrepreneurship to other parts of the world, then that could potentially be the US's greatest export of all time. And this is particularly meaningful in parts of the world where you've got youth bulge, high youth populations. There aren't jobs for them to go to. This idea of giving people a sense of possibility that beyond looking for a job, entrepreneurship can be a path to creating something was really sort of the original impulse.
But Julie, you have your own story that I must imagine has affected the way you're thinking and the way you work. You were born in Egypt. Your family had to be refugees under Black September. Tell us about your background.
I think one of the things that has really shaped my work, and I think maybe the invisible hand that guided my work for a long time until I became aware of it, was ending up on the front lines of the tech revolution in Silicon Valley, and then realizing my life had begun on the front lines of war in the Middle East. And it very much sensitized me to the injustice of not having fair access. And when I became a computer scientist and ended up sort of in Silicon Valley, what I saw was that technology could be potentially the most democratizing force in the history of humankind in its inability to level the playing field and enable fair access. We have this expression, right, necessity is the mother of invention, but really also scarcity is the mother of innovation. And what we see with, the millions of entrepreneurs that have been funded through Kiva, they are the most resourceful, resilient entrepreneurs in the world. They wring something out of nothing, and there's a lot of innovation in the way that they think. So innovation is really about agency. It is about this relentless pursuit of a better way. And we all have kind of that impulse in us. The Industrial Revolution in many ways disconnected us from it. It made us specialists. You are good at this, you do that. And the internet in many ways sort of broke that apart.
And you've used the internet to democratize and to give people access to capital. So this is a part of the Kiva concept.
Yes. Never underestimate how the most unlikely small idea can create a world-changing movement. Kiva started out with one person, a Ugandan fishmonger, a widowed mother of 5. And the idea that people would crowdfund money 11 years ago, send it to a stranger halfway around the world, that person would repay that money, that it could make a difference in their lives, that seemed like the craziest idea of all time. That it could even scale was even crazier. And yet, fast forward 11 years, $1 billion have been loaned. And Kiva's given way to an entire industry of crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending marketplaces, which are estimated at $1 trillion. So you start with this sort of one person, one simple, small, unlikely idea, and that's sort of where the vision and the tolerance for the creativity and the craziness. That's why we have such a high tolerance for craziness and crazy ideas in the Valley, because we know that it's a fine line between crazy and world-changing.
I have this statement that I've heard you say earlier, that great companies are not great because they make a lot of money. They make money because they are great. What would you say, as a final remark here, is your call to action?
Well, my call to action would be, imagine a world where companies compete on being the best for the world and where that makes them the best in the world. And I think that is very much really sort of the fabric of what I see here at work in Norway, and which is why I draw such great inspiration from being here. And then, this just sort of elaborating on this idea of paying it forward. I think one of the things that really makes the ecosystem in Silicon Valley go is we don't have this idea of quid pro quo. I do this for you, you do this for me. We pay it forward, knowing that if we invest in the ecosystem and there's a free sharing kind of trust-based relationships that we form, and we just trust that that's going to come back to benefit us, and that sort of the rising tide lifts all boats. So I would encourage you to sort of take that ethos forward. That's one of the things that we do. We get right.
Thank you so much, Julie. It's fantastic to have you here with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.